and start the slideshow. Okay, here we go. Thank you. All right, so welcome again. Most of you have had contact with our office in one way, shape, or form since starting here last year. And just wanted to, again, review that information for you. In our virtual environment, our office will be closed for in-person visits until, we are given the go-ahead to go back to campus. But until then, you still can reach us by phone. All of our staff have their phones activated to correspond with their office phones. So our general FAD office line is here. And, the best way to reach Diane and me is through email. Okay. As you know, Diane is very responsive, I'm responsive, and that's what we aim to do. So, what we do in faculty affairs and development insofar as thinking about RTP, these are just the various functions that our office has. And again, I'm not gonna just go through all of them here, but really it's about professional development and support for you regarding this process. And again, all questions should be asked, and we will do our best to answer them. As far as how the RTP process works, again, you've had some exposure. You've already went through cycle 1, and you submitted your abbreviated reviews last year. And now you are fully into cycle 2. This is your second full year of service coming up, and this will be your reappointment review. And, here at DH, we call it a full review. In the CBA, it's called a performance review, but it means the same thing. And these are the other cycles. So once you clear your second full review and you are reappointed, then you proceed into cycle 3. And that takes you through tenure, and then cycle 4 will be promotion to full professor. So that'll be a little ways from now. So let me make sure. Let me just get my screen a little compressed here so I can see my video. Anyways, the evaluation procedures for your first probationary appointment. So this is what you are all really concerned about, right? So again, you went through your abbreviated review. Now you will be going through a full RTP review. And since you already submitted your professional plan, why isn't my, oh, here we go. Sorry about that. We will skip that part and head straight for your probationary appointment evaluation procedures. Regarding this, it's a bit more extensive than, let's see, sorry about that. So the evaluation procedures going forward, there's essentially 3 outcomes. One is a 2-year reappointment. Another one is a 1-year reappointment. And the one that nobody wants to have happen is a terminal year. Very, very rare, okay? And so those are the outcomes of your full reviews. And unlike the abbreviated review, there is a much deeper evaluation cycle. So instead of just your department and your dean, it will go beyond your dean, well, beyond your department to the college RTP committee, then to the college dean, then to the provost. If there are conflicting reviews at earlier stages where you're not recommended versus recommended, that would then go to the university RTP committee. and then it stops at the president, and he will be making the final decision. So I think that's another important point to emphasize, is that all levels prior to the president are recommendations. Everyone is making recommendations to the president and the successive stages of review. So when people say that, oh, my department decided X, well, your department really didn't decide anything. Your department recommended, and the final decision is with the president. So I think it's an important distinction to emphasize there. After your first full review, there are two possible review tracks for the following year. If you received a 2-year reappointment, your next review will be an abbreviated review with your professional plan being updated and a brief written report that will cover the last year of activity. Okay, that one, like your review last year, will end at the dean level. If you received a 1-year reappointment, you will get a full RTP review, and you'll need to submit another WPAF or Working Personnel Action File that following year. Okay. And then after you run through the cycle all the way to tenure, in your 6th year review, you will have a full RTP review for tenure and promotion. So let's stop there for a second and just see if there's any questions. Anything at this point in time? Or are we good to keep going? Good to keep going? All right. So I'll share my screen again.
I have a question, Cheryl.
Oh, okay.
Sally.
Okay, hold on just a sec.
Sure.
Let me get rid of the screen share here. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sally.
That's okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So my question is, I submitted my abbreviated review, and for some reason, it felt like a full review. So maybe I need to talk to you afterward, but I received a letter back from everybody, including the president. I thought, I'm gonna have to go back and review now. So I thought you said that we don't get this in the abbreviated.
Well, abbreviated reviews only go through the dean. Did you have service credit, Sally?
No, I didn't.
Okay, it should have stopped with the dean. So you might want to go back and check that.
Yeah, I'm a little confused right now.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Maybe that'll be something to talk, Diane offline or dialogue with me. But yeah,
Okay.
it should have stopped with the dean. Looks like Christina has a question.
Thank you.
Oh, I should know this, but could you explain again what the WPAF stands for and what's included in that?
Sure. It's the Working Personnel Action File, and we'll cover that in some slides coming forward.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Can I interject for 1 second?
Sure.
Sally, so I'm looking, because I have access to my files here. So no, you didn't abbreviate it. So you got reviewed department and it stopped at the dean. So
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk. You can always email me. We could talk about it, but more detail if you want. But I'm looking at, like, I keep a folder for each cycle, and I'm looking at the recommendation letters that were put in that folder. And I see that, yeah, it stops at the dean. So you didn't do a full review.
I didn't. When you talk about the dean, are we talking about the Health and Science Department dean, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That would be Dean Payton for you.
Okay, then. All right, sounds good.
Okay.
I'm confused.
No,
Okay.
This is the time.
Well,
this is your time to, let us know, and we can clarify anything that,
Exactly. This is where we need to ask and answer questions. So that's where we are now. So if there aren't any other questions at this stage, let's continue. Let's see. Here we go. And here we're going to be talking about the WPATH in more detail, okay? So these are the evaluation procedures that you will be most interested in learning about. So thinking about what you need to submit, you know, in accordance with both university policy and our collective bargaining agreement with the CFA, you'll be submitting a WPATH. And so this is really the evidence of what you've been doing since you've been hired here at Dominguez Hills. So you'll be submitting that along with your supplementary information form. And this is what we also call the narrative. And this basically is your opportunity to tell your story in the areas of teaching, research, and scholarly activities and creative activities, and service. Okay, so that's what you will narrate for your committee. And then the WPATH provides the evidence of the activities that you mentioned in your SIF. Okay, so as noted here, the SIF, the Supplementary Information Form, mandates evidence in the WPATH of teaching performance, your scholarship or creative activity, and your service. Okay, so whatever activities you talk about in your SIF, you should back those up with evidence in the WPATH. Okay.
And then can I add something real quick?
Of course, Diane.
So yesterday, I'm sure a lot of you received my email, and I sent you a notification letter. I also attached like the timeline of your RTP cycle, as well as a document it's the supplementary information form guidelines. So again, if you look at that document, whenever you get a chance, it gives you guidance of how you can formulate your SIF as you're working at this. And when you look at that document and hearing Dr. Coos, everything will like just make more sense.
Okay. So your RTP definitions of standards for scholarship and creative activity, you were given those at the time of hire. They are also all located on our Faculty Affairs website at this link here. So again, you were given those. You should have been using them last year as you were doing your abbreviated reviews. And if you do need new copies, they're posted on our website, okay? So some of your departments may have changed their standards or updated and revised their standards since you were hired, okay? As a baseline, RTP reviewers must apply the definitions in effect when you were hired, unless you agree in writing to be reviewed with updated and revised standards, okay? And you can state that in your SIF, and that would then count as you agreeing to be evaluated under the new standards, okay? But if you don't agree to do that, they should be and are mandated to review you under the standards with which you were hired, okay? So if you have questions about that, please feel free to contact Diane, and she can help clarify any concerns you have in that regard. Because departments do, especially after they're hiring new faculty, after they haven't been hiring in a long time, they do work often to update the standards to make them clearer and more concise. So thinking about the process overall, probationary faculty, the standard timeline is 6 years, okay? Faculty members are evaluated during each of their pre-tenure years via abbreviated or full reviews. And this is really important, and we talked about this last year, but I think it's really important to emphasize that the accumulation of satisfactory evaluations year by year are regarded as evidence of satisfactory progress towards tenure and promotion. And this is really one of the things that's great about being a CSU faculty member. because essentially this process is governed by the collective bargaining agreement. So if you have been receiving satisfactory recommendations all the way through, then you will likely, unless there's something cataclysmic that happens between your last full review and your tenure review, you will receive tenure. And that's really an advantage of the year-by-year check-in. And we probably talked a little bit last year about a lot of our experiences in our PhD programs where we may have seen faculty in our doctoral programs not get tenure. Well, that is part of the R1 process, in which they often have just 2 reviews, one at 3 years and then one at tenure. And so they really don't know where they stand as they check, without check-ins along the way. This is where having a check-in every year with either an abbreviated review or a full review, I think really benefits the faculty. Because again, you know where you stand at all times, okay? And that gives you an opportunity if you need to pick it up a little bit or if you need to keep on the same pace, okay? So it's also good to know and important to know that tenure track faculty are evaluated for promotion as well as tenure during their final year of their probationary period. We'll talk about the early tenure mechanism and the standard for that, but this again, these are the standard timelines here. So with that, let me just stop sharing a little bit and just check in to see if anyone has any questions.
Miriam has a question.
I have a question, Cheryl. Thank
Great,
you.
Miriam.
I have a doubt. Does it matter if we get one, I forget the terms, when they ask you to just submit an abbreviated next year, or they say you have to submit the entire file next year?
Right.
Does it matter if we get one or the other for the tenure process?
No, it doesn't.
Every time.
It doesn't happen. It doesn't matter in that respect. Okay, what matters is the satisfactory evaluations that come out of full reviews. Okay, so if you get a 1-year reappointment, that means you'll be resubmitting your WPATH and a CIF, and it will go all the way up to the president. Okay, but if you get a satisfactory review, I mean, again, that's what matters as you make progress towards tenure.
And then I'll say one thing, because I know sometimes people tend to portray that in a negative way, like getting a 1 year and it's like, oh gosh, I have to do another full review. But if you want to just look at the silver lining of it, it's more like it gives you that opportunity to, okay, yeah, you essentially just submitted a full file, so your file's considered complete, but then it allows you that opportunity to kind of just like make your file stronger for the next one. And all this becomes part of your, it's all incorporated into your path. So it becomes entirely, by the time you get to tenure, all that is like collected, it's all in there. So if, let's say you missed something, or maybe your reviewers wanted to see a little bit more in a particular area, because when you're doing abbreviated, you're not providing evidence. So that full review will allow you to, like if anything got missed in a previous, it allows that to have a very strong file. And again, all that is counted and it's incorporated into your path. So as you continue through this journey, at the end, everything comes full circle. And so just try to not like, think about it in a negative way, because I know sometimes it's like, it's portrayed that way, but it's not. I mean, you're still being recommended and you're still being given satisfactory. So those are good things to just keep in mind.
Right. So Horace, you have a question.
2 questions. The first question is that inside the RTP, can you put a section called setbacks?
Could you repeat that, please? Speak
put
up a
it-
little bit, please.
Can you put in a section called setbacks?
Setbacks?
Yeah.
What do you have in mind for that?
So like, for instance, an example, I'm working on a project with my collaborator, and I was supposed to take from my startup funds money to buy a software. It has to go through IT for approval.
Right.
We back and forth for 2 months. The dean intervened.
Okay.
They purchased the software. up to this point, I have not gotten the software, and my collaborators are still waiting for me to do the calculation.
Okay.
And we were supposed to publish this paper in the summer, and that's going up.
I see. I see. So that is what you would want to include in your narrative, in the SIF, in your supplementary information form. I mean, again, it's supposed to narrate your progress, and if there have been any setbacks. And, you know, again, you know, quite a few of you, I've signed your forms. You have the option to do the RTP extension because of the COVID circumstances, right? And just a reminder, that deadline is August 1st for you to submit that. But if you are encountering setbacks due to COVID, you can file for the RTP extension, which would then give you an extra year on your tenure clock. You would still go through an abbreviated review in your tenure year, but then you would be reviewed for tenure in year 7. If you are on track, you can rescind it and then still go up for tenure in year 6. So it's a penalty-free extension. So, but to Horace's specific point, if there are issues that have impacted your progress that might have a bearing on your full review outcome, you should document that in your SIF and your WPATH. So if you say that in your SIF, then you should also include evidence to that effect in your WPATH. So I think that goes to the question you asked, okay?
And then,
I'm sorry, Diane, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Were you done?
No, it sounded like Horace had one more question there, and then we'll move on to our other questions. Did you have a question, Diane, or a comment?
Well, I was going to say that I just, you know, keep in mind, and I think maybe this is how I'm interpreting your question, Horace, is like in your professional plan, did you possibly mention like the goals and stuff that you had set forward for this particular year? So if something like, you know, Dr. Cruz mentioned didn't follow through as you planned, yeah, definitely mention that. And then this is sort of like you're piggybacking from your abbreviated review you just had. And now this is where you show the evidence for those things. And if anything changed or things are like, you know, you have other things planned that you're working on, that is another place to put it in. So you're like telling your story each time, but making it, you know, that it matches whatever your goals you've set. And if something doesn't work out to what you planned, that is an opportunity to indicate that and be very thorough and clear with that.
Right.
And the second question, when I did my professional RTP, the professional plan, how is that going to be different than this? Because I thought I did a very detailed thing. So I don't know. The only thing that I see with changes is all the activities I have done since then to now.
Right. So great question, Horace. So for all of you, your full review should cover your first 2 years, okay? Basically what you did last year during your first year, as well as what you're projecting to do this year, okay? And if you did a thorough write-up for your professional plan, you can repurpose that into your SIF narrative, your supplementary information form narrative. But the biggest difference between the professional plan and all other abbreviated reviews and the full review is in the full review, you need to provide evidence, okay? So in your professional plan, it was about what you intended to do and what you were doing, right? But in this review, you need to back that up with the evidence to show your committee reviewers and all levels of review that you did what you said you did, okay? And that's the purpose of the WPATH, is for you to upload all the evidence to support what you're saying in your narrative. So that's the big difference between those two, okay? So if you did a very complete professional plan, you're really looking good for how you're going to craft your narrative moving forward for the SIF. but it's really about that supporting evidence that you need to back what you say up with, okay?
When you say supporting evidence, like for instance, if you write a grant, do you submit the grant or do you
Yes.
submit?
Yes. And you submit, and this is where I think you need to talk with your chairs and senior faculty in your department about what they would suggest you do as far as which evidence they would suggest that you put into your WPATH. Okay, so I'm not going to get into answering should I do this and that disciplinarily. We're here to talk about the process. And so, Horace, if you have questions, I would encourage you to talk with your department chair and senior faculty in your department. Okay, but yes, supporting evidence is really crucial here. Okay, let's go to Mary. Mary, you had a question?
Yep, thank you. For the narrative that you refer to, will it be like our professional plan in that it's like one document, or is the teaching, scholarship, and service separate documents?
I'll answer that.
Thank you, Diane.
Yeah, so we're going to be continuing to use Interfolio, and so the platform, which I'm currently working on, so you won't see it just yet, but I'm working hard to get you access. But in the meantime, you collect your stuff and organize it. But yeah, so the way when you are ready to log into Interfolio, the platform environment is going to look slightly different from what you initially saw as an abbreviated review. So the way it looks, it's basically you're going to have a WPAF section, and then there's going to be designated sections like for your CV, your PTEs, and and then there's also going to be like a SIF section. So you're going to have the option. So in surveying other faculty that have gone through the full review process, we've gotten like mixed reviews in terms of like what the preference is. So it is your file, so really up to you. So you will be able to see there'll be a section. So if you wanted to have your SIF as one document, like one PDF to Word document or whatever software you're using, you would be able to upload your SIF in that particular SIF section in that WPAF section. And then also you'll see that within the environment, there's going to be 3 other supplemental sections. So there's going to be a teaching section, a scholarship section, and service section as well. And so if, let's say you decided, which some faculty do, and again, it's a personal preference, you wanted to say, okay, I want to have a SIF just for my teaching, there will be a designated section, and you would upload your SIF just for teaching in that teaching section. And then below it, that's where you would put all your evidence. So all your supplemental, it could be your teaching materials, anything that you're justifying as your evidence to that you've mentioned in that narrative portion, that would be the space. And the same thing would go for scholarship or creative activity and service. Each section would have a designated place for you to upload your SIF if you're separating it. And then below that, you would just upload all of your evidence. So again, you don't have to do it twice. If you do it as one document, the reviewers know this too. And when we do the workshop with them, which we will make sure that they understand that some faculty choose to have a one full document and SIF, and then below in the supplemental sections for each area, they've indicated and showcased their evidence. Or they want to split up the SIFs and have it in each of the sections. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know there's not like a hard and fast answer about this, but in terms of like page range, I'm sure they don't want to see 3 pages, but neither do they want to see 50. So what is like in your mind a good approximate number of pages for each section?
So in the past, there was like this old like policy document, and I think it might still exist in the
somewhere.
And they had like 10-page, when this was the binder days too. So in the binder days, there was like this like 10-page limit. It was like kind of like suggested, not like it was set down, but it was suggested. But what we tell faculty, think about it. You're telling your story. So you're the only one that can really tell your story better than anyone. And so you also know your reviewers because they're your colleagues, people you work with closely. And so keep in mind that, you want to be able to be as detailed because this is a big deal. It's your file, it's all the work you're doing, but also like don't redundancy. Like if you've already mentioned something, don't like overdo it because then people, I mean, they're not just reviewing your file, they're reviewing, you know, sometimes a real massive amount of files at the same time. So you want to just be, I guess, mindful of that, I mean, don't leave anything out. That's of course, because you know, it's your work, it's important, but just be mindful that someone, and not just someone, but there's quite a various levels that are reviewing. So you have your department, your college, you know, you have, you know, URTP if it gets to that point. And then you have the president, the provost, who maybe don't know your area of discipline to that detailed extent. So you're telling your story to them. So that's just to be mindful. So we can't really set a page limit on it, just because maybe in certain areas of disciplines, you may have more to tell than another area, but just being mindful of like, this is being read at various levels. And, you know, I mean, it is a lot of documentation, but you just have to kind of like make that decision and how you're organizing it, and, you know, being clear and cover. And then again, your standards. And we even mentioned that in the SIF. If you look at that SIF document I shared with you yesterday, we even have a little like asteroid, like little comment in there that your department standards are basically the tool to drive this whole, you know, this whole file, putting it together, because they're specific guidelines. And I know some older standards are a little vague sometimes, but, you know, for the most part, newer standards, and I know, you know, they tend to be, and when most of you were hired, those standards have been updated to a certain point. So there tends to be a little bit more clear guidelines and expectations. So if you follow that as like your step and checking points, I think, you know, it kind of will help you really formulate. And again, with Dr. Cruz's advice, definitely, I mean, reaching out to your senior faculty that are reviewing you, your department chairs, I mean, they've been through the process. They're actually reviewers in the process. So there's no, like, don't be shy to reach out. And they know this, like, anything before your review is fair game.
Exactly.
Even like after your over is fair game. Of course, while you're being reviewed, we try, like, you know, don't have conversations because it is a little bit of conflict of interest, but before
and confidentiality.
Exactly, yeah, like, you know, before the process, I mean, absolutely, ask the way. I mean, that's what they're there for, to provide the support. And keep in mind, if you seek the guidance from them, and then they, you know, it makes clear sense of what the expectation is, I think it makes both lives easier, because then you know what is expected. Then they're reviewing you, so when your file comes to their, you know, for their review, they're like, oh yeah, you know, got it, we move on. Instead of like, nobody communicates, and then you're left with all this unknown, and then you get a letter that's like super confusing to you that you don't understand, like, well, why are they saying I did insert this? And, you know, so I think it just helps to, like, I think it helps the process overall be more clear and less, you know, stressful.
And just to add to that, Mary, too, and I think this is sort of a good thing to think about as you're thinking about what to include. Again, going to Diane's advice, be thorough, right? But, you know, I've also, I mean, again, as a past department chair, I participated in, I don't even know how many RTP review cycles of faculty at my former institution at Cal State LA. And, you know, I remember, you know, there sometimes could be instances in which the narrative was a bit overwritten to the point that there wasn't evidence backing up really everything that was being asserted, okay? So that's where I want to emphasize, again, that what you say, you need to back up. You know, that's where you provide the evidence, okay?
And for me, even though I had information in my CV, my committee at least wanted that information also in the narrative. So
yes, and you should. And so anything in your CV, you should translate that into your narrative and then back that up with evidence in your WPATH. So think about the 3-point connection there, okay?
Okay.
Because they might see something in your CV that you don't mention in your SIF that doesn't get into your WPATH, and then they're going to say, where is it? Okay. So again, thinking about those 3 points of connection and making sure you tie up those loose ends. Christina, and then Alexandro.
Yeah, my question was, because this review will include our projected activities for the upcoming year, are we supposed to submit evidence of that?
Well, I mean, again, you won't have evidence if it's projected, right? So for the
Yeah,
things
that's why it's kind of confusing.
the things that you have done, provide the evidence for. Okay.
Okay, and then just to clarify, if we did submit the RTP extension due to COVID, that will not affect this particular cycle.
No, so that's another important. I'm so glad you brought that up, Christina. So again, what that does is it extends your tenure clock on the back end. So you will all proceed through your tenure process as scheduled, right? So we will not be skipping any reviews. We'll not be, sort of jumping over reviews. You're going to be going through the review process as you would in a non-COVID situation, but the extension will be added on the back end. So like I had said earlier, is what if you decide, you've submitted your COVID extension request, it's been approved, that'll go into your permanent action, your personnel action file, so your permanent file that we keep in faculty affairs. So during your tenure year, so that would be year 6, instead of a tenure review, then you would have like a mini COVID abbreviated review. That would be just like the abbreviated reviews that you've been having, okay? So then you would go through your your tenure review in year 7. So you never skip a review. It's all about staying on track and then having an extra year on the back end, okay? Alexandro, you had a question.
Yeah, related
Yeah, sure.
topic. I just wanted to make sure for the RTP extension, is it still the same process from the initial email that we received
Yes.
from Diane, where we send the request to our department chair?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So you'll need your department chair's signature, and then they will pass it on to your dean, and then from your dean, it comes to our office.
Okay, great.
Okay? It's super easy.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is check the boxes. Nobody's second guessing anything. And this is where I would really encourage you, if you just want that peace of mind, I'd say do it, okay? Because again, if you're coming up for your tenure review in year 6 and you're like, you know what? I don't need an extra year. I want that promotion and that pay increase next year. I want to go through my cycle. I want to go through my review. And so what you do before you submit your file, all you have to do is contact our office, and then you essentially petition to rescind it. And we will put you back into your normal cycle, and you'll go up for your tenure review.
And there's an option on the form too to resend.
Yeah.
So you just resubmit the form and
yeah. So I mean, again, it's meant to be really easy, painless, and to your maximum benefit. I will say that some of the other campuses in the CSU that did tenure RTP extensions, if people want to essentially rescind, they're making and go on their regular schedule, they're making them go under early tenure, like higher standards for early tenure and promotion. Okay, we're not doing that. Okay, we are not doing that. But we basically want you to have that option to go forward if you're ready without any penalty or any higher standards. So, okay. Do you have another question, Alejandro, or is that it?
No, that's the only one so far.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Chris, you have another question?
Yes, you just mentioned about early tenure review.
Yeah.
Where do I find the guidelines for that?
So that's coming up in our slideshow. So we'll keep moving on then. So if I don't see any other
I think we're good.
hands, I think we're good. And so I will go back and share my screen, and we will proceed with our slideshow. And all right. So again, this is where we left off, was with tenure and promotion. And thinking about the promotion process, again, standard timeline is in your 6th year. If you have a COVID extension, it will be in your 7th year. When you are tenured and an associate professor, the first time you have the option of going up for promotion to full professor is effective your 5th year. But you can go up any time after that when you're ready, okay? Promotions are always effective the beginning of the next academic year. So you will see your promotion pay increase reflected in your first paycheck coming after you start your next academic year. We've gotten a few questions about that from folks who've just gotten tenure.
So if you're a QY faculty, that would be October 1st would be like that first pay period.
Yeah, of the new academic year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's when your pay increase would be effective. Guidelines for early promotion are the same as for early tenure, and we'll talk about those shortly. You know what? We don't have to spend a lot of time on tenure and promotion stuff. And, you know, again, we talked probably a little bit about this last year. The current policy has some confusing language, and I'm working with the Senate Executive Committee and Faculty Policy Committee to try to iron that out. So hopefully, I mean, it's still a ways away. I'm hoping we have it ironed out by the time you come up, so it'll be crystal clear for you. So we're just going to skip over this. This is just good to know for the future, and you will have a new contract. Currently, we are in a contract extension period because of the whole COVID thing. There were supposed to be a new contract this coming year. So that is proceeding on the labor relations front. And essentially, it is a 9%, a minimum of 9% pay increase with promotion to tenure and promotion to full professor. Okay. And again, right now there is no policy to solicit a greater salary increase. So again, this will all matter more to you when you're really close to tenure. Okay, so just wanted to plant that seed. And this goes to Horace's question. Okay, so for probationary faculty, early tenure and promotion are granted rarely and only, and this is per the policy that you see cited here, for, quote, unusually meritorious performance. Okay, so what does that mean? The following guidelines govern early tenure and promotion according to this policy. First is the demonstration of what is called unusually meritorious performance. This will require substantial documentation, and you must be ranked as outstanding in at least 2 of the 3 areas under review: teaching, research, scholarly, and creative activities, and service. Okay, one of those must be teaching. Okay, so this is also just a good reminder, per university policy, the highest rating evaluation that you can get for a full review or tenure, regular tenure, not early tenure and promotion, is satisfactory. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that out there because, like, let's say next year in your full review, you get a satisfactory and you're like, hey, I was outstanding. Why didn't I get an outstanding? Right now, that's the maximum you can get for a full review and your tenure review. Outstanding is only utilized at the current time for early tenure and promotion reviews. Okay, and then you have to get outstanding in at least 2 categories, one of which must be teaching. And it is based primarily on evidence of demonstrated merit and performance at CSUDH. So let's say you came in with service credit and your dean, you know, part of your terms and conditions was that that would be used towards tenure. But really for early tenure and promotion, it has to be what you did here substantially more than what you did elsewhere. For all of you, that doesn't matter because you didn't get service credit, okay? But that's just what the policy states. And again, this screen recaps what we were talking about earlier, is that you have to be outstanding in teaching and one of the two other areas and a minimum of satisfactory in the third area. So you cannot get any unsatisfactories and be eligible for early tenure and promotion.
I think Horace has another question.
Okay, go ahead.
I think you might have just answered it. You're saying that to go up for early tenure, you cannot have a satisfactory whatsoever.
You cannot have an unsatisfactory in that unsatisfactory in that third area of evaluation.
Okay.
Okay. And you know, the question then means what is outstanding versus satisfactory? Okay. It's a very loose standard in the policy, and right now it means it is above and beyond satisfactory. I know that might not be satisfying, but that's the way it is, okay?
And some new standards do have specific criteria.
Yes.
Early tenure promotion guidelines. So that is something to keep in mind. You look at your standards, they may have it. And again, I know some of the older standards don't have that criteria, so that's why the policy from our campus, it's a way to measure what would constitute as early tenure.
So, and again, to that point, I'm just talking about what the campus policy is, but what Diane's saying here is if your department standards actually have the criteria of what you need for early tenure and promotion, then that will define it, okay? And then after you get tenure, you go up for promotion to full professor. And as we said earlier, eligibility for standard post-tenured promotion begins in your 5th year, okay? And then it continues. So if you don't go up that first year, you can go up the next year, the next year, the next year. But what you will need to do is a full cumulative file since your tenure review, even if it's 15 years later. So this is also, what we talk with your reviewers about. We give the same presentation to your reviewers as we give to you. So everybody is on the same page regarding expectations. So when thinking about what your reviewers will be doing when they look at your file, you will need to use the following evaluative terms. Satisfactory, which denotes sufficient progress towards tenure and promotion within normal timelines. It should not be used to favorably recommend early tenure or promotion. Again, outstanding is the higher bar there. Unsatisfactory denotes insufficient progress. And again, your standards hopefully talk about that at the department level. And again, to remind y'all, outstanding is only used for early tenure and or early promotion evaluations, okay? In addition, per this very old policy that goes back to 1984, in recommending you for reappointment, in addition to evaluating your work as satisfactory or unsatisfactory, they have the following language to choose from for their recommendation. Because remember I had said earlier that the president makes the final decision and all previous levels make recommendations. So there's boxes that will be checked. Those that are available per the language of the PM policy is highly recommend, recommend, recommend with reservations, or do not recommend. So, you know, I talk with reviewers about discouraging the use of recommend with reservations. I mean, it can be used to get someone's attention. But again, if we're talking about a tenure review, I just talk about with them that it's better to take a stand so it's not muddied, okay? Because the recommend with reservations, you know, sort of is open to interpretation. It's like, well, maybe they don't want to be the bad guy and they just want to punt it to the next level, okay? It's better to be forthcoming and to let people know where they stand. So that, again, but they have the choice of those 4 recommendations. Okay, again, that is different than satisfactory or unsatisfactory. So, question, please.
Horace?
Yeah, so 2 quick questions. One was on your last slide when you said outstanding. It seems to imply that it is the committee that recommends you for early promotion and not you choose that.
Well,
tenure.
Yeah, great question. And to clarify, you choose whether you go up for early promotion or tenure, okay? You need to make that decision, and I would encourage everyone, if you're thinking about that at a later date, that you do so in discussion with both your dean and your chair, okay? They cannot put you up for early tenure without your assent and knowledge, because you're going to need to do a very different file for a tenure review than you would do for your full review, okay? So again, that is your decision whether you want to roll the dice and go up for early review. Really, there's no penalty in doing so, besides potentially a little bit of a ego ego blow if you don't get it. But then you can just do your review the next year, okay? So there's no penalty, but you have to make that decision. Nobody makes that decision for you.
Yes, and you know, piggyback on Cheryl's comment, when you're submitting a full review, just sort of like you did with the abbreviated, there was a candidate form you had to check off. It was like your cycle year and your department, your name, and that stuff. So when you're doing a full review, the same thing goes. It's just that you'll have a box that will say reappointment. If you, let's say you are doing early tenure, early promotion, or both, then you would check off. So you're basically, the form, the candidate form is a required form to fill out within the platform. And then you are making that indication to your reviewers so they know what type of review they're reviewing you under. And also in your narrative, if you're doing that type of file, you're indicating that as well. So when you're telling your story, you're mentioning that, you know, this is, you know, going up, I want to be considered for, you know, early tenure, early promotion.
Right, and you'll do a very different SIF for a tenure file than you would do for a full review. You know, again, for a full review, it only covers the previous time since your last full review, either 1 or 2 years. For a tenure file, your SIF will be the whole thing. You know, the evidence base will be different depending on when your last full review was, but your overall arc of your journey to tenure will be covered in your SIF, okay? You had another question, Horace?
Yes, so when we were preparing the abbreviated, for the abbreviated file, we had gotten a message that where the PT is concerned, we didn't have to submit it. Now that COVID happened, and we went into a whole different system,
right?
How is this process going to be evaluated? Are we still going to be using PTs?
Yeah. Good question. Good question. So you might recall that our office sent out a memo regarding this issue last spring. So if you want your PTEs to count and be considered and evaluated for your review, that is your option for spring, not for fall, not last fall, but for spring. because of the very abrupt move to COVID, okay, because of COVID. So again, you have that option whether your PTEs will be included from last spring into your WPATH. And Diane, you can talk about the process, but you will be uploading those into your WPATH, correct?
Yes, correct. And then
Okay.
let's say you are, let's say impacted due to the situation, and that memo, that would be evidence. So you would need to include that memo in that PTE section. There's a designated section for PTEs in Interfolio. And then make sure in your narrative, you are thorough and describe that. Because keep in mind that you're telling your story, so your reviewers know, and then again, this goes to the president level, so president won't know. If he doesn't see PT, he's gonna assume, oh, something's missing. So you wanna make sure that if you're impacted by that, that memo serves as evidence, and then in your narrative, you're gonna mention and provide the justification for it.
Right.
Yeah. So
and again, you will be making that decision probably based on the results of your PTEs, because from what I understand from Ruby Martinez in our office, it sounded like response rates were pretty stable. And you, looking at the results of your PTs, maybe you made that transition and your students appreciated how you did that and loved it, and you got great PTEs. You're going to want to include those, right? Okay. So for those of you that, again, maybe you didn't have a great response rate, maybe it was a real sort of bipolar, they loved you, they hated you, and how that transition went, maybe you won't want to include that one, right? So again, this is your option. And that is, the exceptions that we made last spring and negotiated with the union there, okay? So again, going forward, we're going to have to re-engage this issue likely. But, just to let y'all know, we have to do PTEs every semester per the contract. The question is, to what degree are they considered? And you have that option regarding the fall, or the spring last year, sorry. Are there any other questions at this point, Diane?
No, I think
okay.
It's along.
Okay. So let's go forward here. Okay. So, thinking about recommendations and evaluations by reviewers, the recommendations are the recommendations of the committee. Just want y'all to know that. There can be no minority reports. We do not have that provision in our RTP policy. So it's basically a simple majority. Okay, split decisions may be indicated in the recommendation, but again, the simple majority goes. Thinking about final considerations, original signed valuations will be uploaded to Interfolio. And again, this is for the committee and the review levels, and the copies of which will be sent to you, okay, by our office. And this is really important here. And so just like you had the option of rebuttal for your professional plan abbreviated review that you did last year, you do have the contractual option to submit a written rebuttal and or request a meeting to discuss any recommendation letter at any level, okay? Any recommendation letter. Let me say that. The president's decision is final. He has been open to discussing letters, but again, contractually, this is about recommendations. So that's basically all previous levels. The rebuttals must be issued within 10 calendar days of your receipt of them, okay? This is not Dominguez Hill's policy. This is outlined in the collective bargaining agreement with the union. Okay, so please make note of that. Let's say, you submit your file in September, and let's say you get an article accepted after you submitted your file, okay? We urge everyone to utilize the process for the late submission of materials, and there is a process. So the university RTP committee must approve this. So what you would do is you would contact our office and ask for permission to add this to your file. We would then pass that on to URTP to consider it. And then they would make a decision. If it was an affirmative decision, then essentially it goes all the way back to the the first level of review, so they can then reconsider whether that might impact their evaluation. So let's say you got an article accepted a couple months after you submitted your file, and it was already at the dean's level. It would go back to the beginning, and the committee, your department committee, would have to weigh in whether they would reconsider, well, whether they, are going to change their evaluations, because they have to reconsider. And if they don't, they just say it stands, and then it moves to the next level. Okay, but there is this process, and we encourage everyone to take advantage of this process because it can make a significant difference of outcomes, especially when you're up for tenure. Okay, so again, it's limited to materials that became available after your file's submitted. It's not about missed stuff. Okay, if you forgot to put something in, you forgot to put something in, and that cannot be remediated through this late submission process. It's only stuff that became available afterwards. And again, it's usually about articles being published, or, if you're an artist, an exhibition acceptance or something like that, okay? And again, it will be sent back to the initial committee for evaluation, and then it will go all the way back up, okay? Final thoughts on the RTP process. And again, this is mostly for reviewers. Last year you got an evaluation of your professional plan. It wasn't a recommendation. But the full RTP reviews at every level except the president's is a recommendation for reappointment. And just to underscore what I said earlier, your department, your chair, your dean, the provost, they don't make the decisions. The president makes the decision. Everyone else is making recommendations.
Cheryl, we got a question from Jared.
Okay,
So
sure.
he wants to know if we can explain the criteria used for determining a 1-year versus a 2-year reappointment.
We get asked that question a whole lot.
It's a good one.
It's a great one. And sadly, we do not have really specific, we don't have a specific answer for that, okay? I mean, typically that happens when review levels, and again, this is about the recommendation, review levels want to see more evidence in a particular area. Okay, or maybe two areas. So maybe, what we've seen in the past is folks who submitted and forgot to, they submit their files and maybe forgot to submit syllabi that they should have submitted. Okay, you might get a 1-year review because there was a lack of evidence, or a 1-year reappointment because there was a lack of evidence. Okay, so that's one reason we encourage everyone to be as thorough as possible. Okay, because you don't want to get a 1-year reappointment because you left stuff out of either your CV and then out of your WPAF and your evidence. Okay, so thinking again about those 3 points of connection, your CV should connect with your SIF, with your narrative, which needs to connect with the evidence that you supply in your WPAF to back up what you're saying you did in both your CV and your SIF, okay? So that's about as good as we can get there as far as, you know, what makes that determination.
Can I follow up the question? Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, sure.
I guess, is there a rebuttal process between,
Yes.
if you get a 1-year appointment,
Well,
is there a rebuttal
actually,
process?
no, there
No.
isn't.
Okay.
There is not. You can request a meeting with the president. You can also request a meeting, or you can, if it's a recommendation, you know, at a previous level, you can you can write a rebuttal that regarding whatever issue. Okay, that is your right per the collective bargaining agreement. Okay. Or you could just request a meeting, you know, with the committee or the dean and just say, you know, I had some concerns. I'm wondering why you recommended. And again, they're not making the decision. The president makes the decision why you recommended a 1 versus a 2-year. And they might tell you, or they actually have the right to listen to your concerns and say, thank you, duly noted. Okay.
And one thing I want to add about the rebuttal, definitely don't get discouraged to exercise your right to use a rebuttal, because
exactly.
Again, you know your work better than anyone. So rebuttals are intended, you know, to, like, if something wasn't clear, or again, in that situation, if it's something like that where you can actually, like, you know, state the case, but tone is everything. So, you know, in the rebuttals, make sure, you know, you're courteous, you're thankful to your reviewers for taking the time to look at your stuff, but at the same time, you stick to the facts. You're very factual in that rebuttal, and you're not inserting like new things, you know, because I know sometimes people like, oh, I missed it, and they want to use that up, and then so no. So going back to Cheryl's point before, is like URTP, the added material, there is a process for that, but the rebuttal, you certainly, let's say you did include the actual evidence material, and for whatever reason that level missed it completely, but you could reinsert it in there in a sense where you were mentioning that it was there, and you're just like extending on it and making things a little bit more clear for that level. So that's just something to keep in mind, because I know, again, you may not even use the rebuttal process at all, and that's fine. But I know I get a lot of questions, and sometimes like people are on the fence. And again, Faculty Affairs, Cheryl and I, we are a neutral party in this whole process. So like, we're not reviewers. We're just there to basically make sure that, you know, policy is being followed, procedures being followed, that, you know, the reviewers are, you know, doing a thorough and basically doing their job in terms of reviewing. And so again, we're here to support you in any way we can. So any question, I mean, don't feel discouraged or think it's silly. Like, no, believe me, they're all questions are good questions. So at least in my view.
Right. Christina has a question in the chat too. She writes, does the CV actually count for anything? It sounds like what's getting counted by review is actually the CIF and WPATH. Must be redundant. Actually, the CV is a required piece of the review process. And it's also important to note too, a recommendation that the provost has, and this will impact like later reviews, not so much the one that you have right now, because this is really your first one. But he would like, he suggests that you highlight what you've done during your period of review, okay? Because your CV is, you know, essentially your vitae of everything you've done as a professional, right? But it would help him, it would help your reviewers for you to highlight in bold what you've done during this period of review. It's not mandatory, but again, you want to provide those signposts for your reviewers to make the process for them as easy as possible. That's why organizing your WPATH really well is really important. Why making your CIF clear is really important. And again, you're trying to provide your reviewers with the material they need to best evaluate you. So it's a required piece, but again, what you're doing with your CIF, which is different than your CV, is you're providing the narrative interpretation of that material that is within your CV. Okay, you're contextualizing it.
And then
that's what you do.
Sorry, Cheryl.
No, go ahead.
One thing I'll add is, in addition to your CIF and your CV and your PTs and, you know, the documents we've talked about in this presentation, you also need to submit an index. And so the index, basically, it's just listing like your evidence, because the index, it's a contractual thing. It's also mentioned in that CIF guideline that I provided with your notification letter. You'll see the index in there. So the index is basically, you create it. It's what it is. It's what an index is. Like, you're just listing and itemizing all of your evidence. So in your 3 areas, making sure, because what happens at the end of this whole process, your CIF, all your letters of recommendation, and that index and CV become part of your personnel action file. And that's what we download and goes into that hard copy file we keep in-house in our office. And so the things that we don't download, because I mean, I know some of you will have like massive files, because again, it's the work you're doing. And so your evidence, we can't possibly, I mean, there's no way to fit all of that stuff into a file. So the index serves as that purpose to it. And again, this is very important as you get through the process and you go up for tenure promotion, because then, you know, we mentioned earlier, all of your previous reviews become fair game in the process, in terms of your reviewers will then be able to go back and review. And if something, you know, making sure that something was included, it wasn't missed. And so by having that index, it allows them to know that this was submitted at that particular time and it wasn't missed on the back end when they're reviewing you for tenure or promotion. So I hope that makes sense. But if not, you know, again, you can always email me, reach out. But I just always want to, you know, mention that, because the index is important. It's a, you know, it's actually easy for you guys, because all you're doing is listing your items that you've submitted as evidence. But you know, there's a real purpose for having it, and again, it becomes part of your path file.
Any other questions? And so again, this is not your last opportunity to ask us any questions. Please feel free to email. You can make appointments via Zoom with me or Diane, and we're happy to help you. Again, if there's anything that needs, Mary writes in the chat, do you have an example of an index? Just list the item and not provide the page number of it.
So, I mean, that's a good question. So last year I created like a template of an index, but to be quite honest with you all, like I felt like it's sort of, it was just more like the space you would just type and, you know, type in your information, but this is your file. So one thing we highly encourage is some people, when they're referencing their evidence in their narrative, they use like, you know, like 1 of 1 or appendix, or, you know, and I know this kind of goes back to like mirroring the binder days, how they would do the tabs, and each tab like meant like what each supporting evidence would tie into what was referenced in that narrative part. So it is up to you. That's where you kind of, and again, this is your file. We just kind of give you like the guidance in terms of like how to and what's expected to put this together. But in terms of how you actually formulate it and organize it, I mean, it is your file. So when you're referencing, let's say if you are using like, you know, different ways of your referencing your material, just make sure it's consistent with the index, because again, some reviewers will go to the index and be like, okay, what is 1.1? Oh, that's her, you know, that's her like course material or something. I mean, in course syllabi or something like that. Then they go back and they're like, oh, it matches, you know. So you just want to make sure like everything flows nicely, because in Interfolio, the nice part is for the reviewer is when they open your file, it opens up like a reader. So they're just like kind of like turning the pages and following your story, and then able to navigate and find what matches, you know, with what you've mentioned as the materials that, or the projects you're working on. So again, you know, you can always email me something and show me if you haven't, but I mean, we don't really have like a set like template, or even like, again, like I said, I created that one document, but I felt like when I was chatting and surveying faculty, it seemed like you can create your own index. I mean, it's just making sure that you list everything that you submitted as evidence is on that index. Yeah, and again, you know, your deans, your chairs, I mean, some of them are even willing to share their files, you know.
Exactly.
Or even your faculty, your a little bit more seasoned faculty that have already done this for a little, they're still probationary, but they're going through the process themselves, and they've gotten like a really good, recommendation, or like in terms of feedback of how they put together their file. Yeah, I mean, you can, and again, you can go into another area of discipline, but if you find someone that's willing to share, which, I mean, again, it can't steal anyone's work. I mean, it's your own personal accomplishments that working on. So yeah, definitely. I mean, that might be something to consider. And, you can get ideas from there.
Right. So, Kondaker, you have a question. You said in the chat, do you have any suggestions for people who have been approved for RTP extensions for COVID-19? Is there any specific concern you have, or any specific kind of suggestion that you would like?
No, I was asking, like, is it going to be same as what I did last time, like cycle 1? So I don't have to submit anything much detail.
So again, in cycle 1, you didn't submit any evidence, right? And so, like what we talked about earlier, when reference to Horace's question, it's about, making sure your CV, your CIF, and the evidence all match up, right? And so, this is regardless of whether you have an RTP extension for COVID or not. It's really about making sure your evidence backs up what you said. So one of the things I could think of maybe that happened last spring, I know a lot of academic conferences got canceled at the last minute, right? Mm-hmm. And so you might want to talk about that and say that you had been accepted to present a paper at X, Y, and Z conference. You include the email or the, the supporting evidence for that, but due to COVID, it was canceled, and that was outside of your control, okay? So that's the kind of documentation that you might want to provide that shows that you're still making progress, but something happened outside your control that you want to mention in your narrative, in your CIF, as well as the supporting documentation that the conference was canceled. Okay. So that might be a good way to talk about, how COVID had an impact, right? And, just in that same way, I would encourage you to talk about and narrate. And again, you don't have to go into excruciating detail, but talk maybe about how you attempted to navigate that abrupt shift from face-to-face learning to virtual alternative modes of instruction, okay? And again, it's about your reflection, it's about your intentionality, it's about your thoughtfulness.
But when I read the, document that the dean sent me, it's telling me that I don't have to submit anything very specific. It will be like an abbreviated, evaluation.
So last year you did an abbreviated. This year, everybody is doing a full review. Okay, so again, if your dean said you're on track, you're doing a good job, that's good, right? So what you do is then you repurpose what you did with your professional plan and what you accomplished, and then you put that into this new package, which is a supplemental information form backed up with evidence, okay? And that's really the biggest difference between a abbreviated review, including the first one that you did, and the one you're doing now. It's about supplying the evidence, because you didn't supply evidence for your professional plan last year.
Yeah, I understand. Maybe I'm not posing the question properly. So what I read from the, documentation from the dean, like it says that I'm going to be submitting an abbreviated review again this time because I got extension.
No. So again, like we said earlier, everyone here is going through a full review, whether you got a COVID extension or not, okay?
Got it.
And your dean did not say anything different, because I know the form, right?
Okay.
And maybe this is something I need to connect with the deans so they understand really clearly how this extension works, okay?
Okay.
And after I get off this email, after I got off this thing, I think I'm gonna send everybody an email just to make sure we're all on the same page, okay? So everyone is doing a full review, extension or not.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just, I mean, I was kind of, I looked at the chat and I saw a couple people mention Interfolio. If you guys have a couple minutes, I mean, I can go ahead and show you like the environment. It's going to be a template from last year, 1920, because the 2021, I'm working on that phase, you know, and even just to let you know, there are some updates that are taking place this summer. So Interfolio interface, as far as environment, it's going to look slightly different, but the usage of it is the same. So logging in with your username, password from DH credentials, that's going to be the same. But obviously, the template will be different from what you've used to seeing when you've done an abbreviated review. So because there'll be more spaces. But if you're okay, I can go in there and share the screen, and you can just kind of like get an idea. Because as far as the content that you're going to be submitting is going to be the same. The only difference is, of course, maybe the layout and the way the interface is going to look, just because they're making their own updates. So I mean, you know, I can do that.
So Diane,
Yeah.
when do you think you'll have the new template or environment built?
I'm like, you know, I don't want to put a timeline, but I'm working hard because I kind of want to do them all at the same time.
Yeah.
It just makes it easier for me because, you know, you guys are Cycle 2, and I know that this because you are going up earlier in terms of like September is your due date for submitting your files. So you're definitely the first batch that I'm going to be like getting done. So the nice thing about Interfolio is that it does allow like templates already created. I just have to update them based on some of the changes that we've made this summer. So definitely, I mean, in the meantime, you know, collect your stuff, save it, because the easiest part will be uploading into Interfolio. Then, you know, and all you're doing is uploading. You're not creating anything in the platform.
Right. So maybe Diane, you and I could talk about that once you get their environments built, maybe you could have just maybe you could host then a quick Zoom to just walk them through that afterwards.
And we could do that too. I think, and I was thinking that might be a better, because then you have a true environment, as opposed to something that was last year. But
I would say that would be less confusing.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And so I'll get working on that. And
so everybody watch for Diane's invitation, okay? I think that is a good idea. So just going back to make sure we're all on the same page with Kondaker's question. So the RTP extension, you know, again, that comes on the back end of your process, not impacting how you proceed through now. So everybody's going through a full review in their second year. No abbreviated reviews this year, okay? So everybody's going to be doing a CIF, everybody's going to be doing a WPAF, and you know, again, that's a full review. You're doing that regardless whether you did an extension or you're not doing the extension. Your extension comes on the back end, okay? And I'm going to remind the deans of that when we get off this call. So just for their clarification purposes, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Any other questions at this point? We've gone a little bit over, but we want to make sure all questions are asked and answered at this time. And again, we're here for you. And we are happy to clarify anything as you start to chew on this. We'll be posting the slides. One person asked if we could send the PowerPoint to them. I'm fine with that. Diane, if you want to go ahead and do that, that would be great. And we'll be also posting it to our FAD website. All right, and we'll also have the recording there too, or at least the link to the recording.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? Well, great. Well, thank you all for being here. It's great to see your faces, and best wishes as you work to get ready for the semester. I know it's going to be an interesting one, That's for sure. But I know you're up to the challenge. So good luck with everything, and please let us know how we can help you. Okay.
Hi.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.